Ease. You think I won't pull this trigger? Ease. Damian Cross pressed the barrel against the back of her skull. Ease. And the entire emergency wing went silent. Every doctor. Ease. Every patient. Ease. Every terrified soul holding their breath. But the woman he was holding didn't flinch. She didn't beg. Ease. She just turned her head slowly. Ease. Looked him dead in the eye. Ease. And said, Ease. Go ahead. But you better hope you never find out who my father is. He laughed. He had no idea that laugh would be the worst mistake of his life. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're in the right place. Please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The call came in at 2:43 in the afternoon, and by the time shift supervisor Margaret Holloway grabbed the emergency phone at the nurse's station, her coffee was already getting cold. She had worked 22 years at Lakewood Memorial Medical Center. She had seen gunshot wounds and car accidents and families fall apart in waiting rooms. She thought she had seen everything. She had not seen this. We have multiple armed individuals breaching the east entrance. The voice on the other end said, and Margaret recognized it as Derek from hospital security. And she had never once heard Derek sound afraid in all the years they had worked together. He sounded afraid now. Margaret, I need you to initiate lockdown. Right now. Do not hesitate. She hit the button before he finished the sentence. The intercom crackled across every floor of Lakewood Memorial, and the words came out flat and clinical, the way emergency protocols always sound when they're trying not to cause panic while announcing something completely terrifying. Attention all staff. Code Silver in effect. All personnel, please secure your areas immediately. Use Code Silver active shooter, armed intruder. The code that every hospital trains for and prays never comes. On the 4th floor, Emily Carter was in the middle of checking the IV line of a 73-year-old retired schoolteacher named Gerald Marsh, who had been admitted 2 days ago for a hip replacement and who had spent most of those 2 days complaining cheerfully about the food and asking Emily if she had ever considered a career in something less stressful. Gerald had a grandson named Marcus who visited every evening and always brought chocolate chip cookies that Gerald was absolutely not supposed to eat, and absolutely did eat the moment Emily turned her back. Emily liked Gerald. She was checking his fluids and listening to him tell her about the time he coached a little league team to a district championship in 1987. He's a story she had now heard 3 times. When the intercom cut through everything. Gerald stopped talking. Emily straightened. What does that mean? Gerald asked, and his voice had shifted from cheerful to something smaller, something older. It means I need you to do exactly what I say, Emily told him, and her voice was calm in the way that voices are only calm when the person has worked very hard to make them that way. I need you to stay in this bed. I need you to get as low as you can and stay there. Do not come to the door. Do not use your call button unless you are having a medical emergency. Can you do that for me? Gerald looked at her for a moment, and then he nodded, and something in his expression shifted because he had been a teacher long enough and lived long enough to recognize when someone younger than him knew exactly what they were doing. Be careful, he said. Emily squeezed his hand once and moved to the door. The hallway was already changing. She could hear it before she could see it, the sound of feet moving fast, the sound of voices dropping to urgent whispers, the sound of doors clicking shut one after another down the corridor like dominoes falling. A young nurse named Priya came around the corner at almost a jog, her eyes wide, and she grabbed Emily's arm. They're saying men with guns came through the ER, Priya said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Real guns, Emily, not like a patient with something in their waistband. Military guns. They have people on the ground in the emergency department. Emily asked. 3, maybe 4. I don't know. Have you seen them yourself? No, Derek told Janice, and Janice told me. Okay, Emily said. Okay, go back to the east wing and get everyone into rooms. Don't use the stairwells on the left side. Lock the supply closet and stay with Dr. Huang's team until this is over. Priya stared at her. How are you this calm right now? Emily didn't answer that. She didn't have an answer that would make sense quickly enough to matter. She just said, go, and Priya went. Emily moved to the window at the end of the hall. Below she could see the street. 3 police cruisers had already pulled up. Another was coming. The blue and red lights were going, but the sirens were off, which meant someone had made the call to keep this quiet from the outside as long as possible. Is smart. Panic in a building full of sick people was its own kind of emergency. She scanned the parking area. She counted exits by habit. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. Something she didn't even realize she was doing until she was already doing it. She started thinking the way her father had taught her to think. James Carter had never formally trained Emily in anything tactical. He had never sat her down and said, here's how to assess a threat situation. It had happened slowly. The way all important things happen slowly over years of watching. Over years of listening to men around a table talk about how the world really worked. Over years of her father, looking at every room they entered and every street they walked down and every unfamiliar vehicle that sat parked too long in front of the clubhouse. James Carter had survived decades in a world where danger was not theoretical, and he had done it by teaching himself to see. And whether Emily had wanted it or not, she had learned to see the same way. She was still standing at that window when she heard the elevator doors open at the end of the corridor. She turned. 3 men stepped out. They were wearing tactical vests, not police vests. Military-style gear, dark with no markings, no badges, no identification of any kind. 2 of them carried assault rifles held at low ready, the way people carry weapons when they've carried them professionally for a long time. The third man, the one in the front, had a sidearm holstered at his hip and the kind of face that Emily recognized immediately. Not because she had seen him before, because she recognized the type. She had grown up around men who could be frightening, and she knew the difference between men who were frightening because they were dangerous and men who were frightening because they wanted you to think they were. This man fell into a third category that was rarer and worse. Men who were dangerous and knew it, and had stopped caring what anyone thought about it a long time ago. He was in his mid-40s, sharp-eyed, moving with the practiced economy of someone who had spent years in hostile environments. He scanned the hallway the moment he stepped off the elevator, his eyes moving in that particular pattern, exits, threats, obstacles, and Emily recognized the pattern because it was the same one she used. He saw her immediately. Most of the remaining staff had retreated to rooms or supply areas. Emily was standing in the middle of the hallway. The man walked toward her at an unhurried pace, and the 2 men behind him fanned out slightly, covering angles, and Emily watched all of this and did not move. On the ground, he said when he was close enough that he didn't need to raise his voice. I'm a nurse, Emily said. I didn't ask what you were. I told you to get on the ground. There are patients on this floor who need medical monitoring. If I get on the ground, some of them could die. The man stopped walking. He tilted his head slightly, the way people do when something doesn't match their expectations. He had come onto this floor expecting frightened hospital workers who would do whatever they were told. Emily was not doing what she was told. What's your name? He asked. Emily, last name. She paused for less than a second. Mitchell. It wasn't her real last name. It was her mother's maiden name, which she had used as an alias for small things over the years whenever she didn't want to advertise who her father was. She used it without thinking, the way you use a reflex. The man studied her. Emily Mitchell, he repeated, and his tone suggested he was filing it away. Okay, Emily Mitchell, here's how this works. You're going to take me to the 4th floor secure ward, and you're going to do it quietly, and you're going to make sure nobody in this building does anything stupid. Can you do that? Who are you looking for? She asked. That's not your concern. If you're looking for a patient and you end up in the wrong room, somebody could get hurt unnecessarily. I'm trying to help you find what you want faster so that you leave faster. He stared at her for a long moment. And Emily held his gaze. And there was a silence in that hallway that had a particular weight to it. The kind of silence that happens when 2 people are sizing each other up and both of them know it. He's Ethan Cole, the man said finally, room 412 or 413. He's admitted under trauma protocol. Emily knew exactly where room 412 was. She also knew that Ethan Cole was not in it. He had been moved 40 minutes ago because a physician named Dr. Reeves had been concerned about his blood pressure and wanted him closer to the monitoring station. Ethan Cole was now in room 417, and Emily knew this because she had been the one to help move him. Follow me, she said. She led them down the hall at a steady pace, and as she walked, she was doing several things at once. She was memorizing their positions. She was noting which patients' doors were closed versus open, and what that meant about who might be visible and who might not be. She was counting ceiling tiles because the hospital had a maintenance access point above the supply area on the east end of this floor, and she had helped a repair technician access it once, and she knew where it was. And she was thinking about Ethan Cole in room 417 and what it would mean if these men reached him. She stopped in front of room 412. "This is the room you're looking for," she said. "He's..." The lead man gestured to one of his associates, who moved to the door, pushed it open, and swept inside. A moment later, he came back out. "Empty," he said. "Bed's been used recently. Equipment's still running." The lead man looked at Emily. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. "He was moved," Emily said before the man could speak. "About an hour ago. I don't know where. The charge nurse would have updated his location, but she's on the 3rd floor." It was a believable lie. It was believable because it was almost true. And Emily delivered it with the same steady calm she used when she told families that their loved ones were in surgery, and everything was being done, and they should try to stay calm, which was also almost true. The lead man took a step toward her, close enough now that she could see a faded scar along his jawline and the particular flatness in his eyes that came from a life of making difficult decisions and learning to stop feeling them. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said quietly, "and I need you to understand that I've done this a very long time, and I can tell when someone is giving me the truth and when they're not." "Where is Ethan Cole?" Emily looked at him directly. "I moved him to 417 about 40 minutes ago. But I need you to understand something first. You don't get to make conditions." "I know I don't," she said. "I'm not making conditions. I'm giving you information that affects your mission." Ethan Cole had a spinal injury in addition to the gunshot wound. He can't be moved quickly without risking permanent paralysis. If you go in there and grab him and drag him out of this hospital, you might kill him before you get whatever it is you want from him. I'm telling you this because you need to know it. The man was very still. "Why are you telling me that?" he said. "Because I'm a nurse," Emily said, "and because dead hostages aren't useful to anyone." A long pause. Then the man almost smiled. It wasn't a warm expression, but it was the first break in the controlled surface of his face. "Damien," he said, and it took Emily a moment to realize he was introducing himself. Is that your first name or your last name?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "Probably not," she admitted. "You're different," Damien said, and there was something almost like curiosity in his voice. "Most people by now are crying or begging or trying to run. You're having a conversation with me. Crying and begging and running don't help my patients," Emily said. Damien looked at her for another moment. Then he reached out and took her arm, not violently, but with a grip that made it completely clear she was not going to walk away from him. "Then you're coming with me, insurance." Emily did not resist. She went with him, because resisting at that moment would have been the wrong tactical choice. And she knew it, and she filed that away and started thinking about when the right moment would be. What she could not know yet was that at the precise moment, Damien Cross took hold of her arm on the 4th floor of Lakewood Memorial Medical Center. A call was being made to a number that rang in a weathered wooden building 47 miles away in the foothills east of town, where a man named James Carter was sitting at a long table going over the books for the auto repair shop his chapter used as its legitimate business front. And the person calling was a police detective named Rosa Mendez, who had worked organized crime in this county for 11 years, and who had James Carter's number saved under the contact name JC because she had learned a long time ago that there were situations where calling him was faster than everything else. "James," she said, when he picked up. "Rosa," he said, because he had learned to recognize the specific quality of silence that preceded bad news. "We have an active hostage situation at Lakewood Memorial." A pause. "Emily works at Lakewood Memorial." James Carter said. And his voice had gone very flat. The way a voice goes when a person is concentrating very hard on not feeling what they're feeling. "I know," Rosa said. The line went quiet for 4 seconds. Is she one of the hostages?" James asked. Rosa closed her eyes for a moment. "We don't have full confirmation yet. The situation is developing fast." "I wanted you to know before you heard it another way." 4 more seconds of quiet. "How many armed men?" James asked. "At least 3, possibly 4, professional grade." "This isn't a robbery, James. They're looking for someone specific." A protected witness named Ethan Cole." James Carter was quiet for a moment longer than Rosa expected. I know that name, he said slowly. I know you do, Rosa said, which is part of why I called you. James, I need you to promise me you're going to let us handle this. James Carter did not promise her that. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said, and ended the call. Rosa Mendez sat at her desk and stared at the phone for exactly 3 seconds, and then she made another call to the officer in charge at the scene and said, "We may be getting company from a second direction. Please, I need you to be ready for that. At the auto repair shop in the foothills, please." James Carter walked out of the back office into the main garage, where 6 members of his chapter were working on various vehicles, and he stood in the center of the space without saying anything for a moment. And the men read his posture the way men who have ridden together for decades learn to read posture. And one by one, the tools stopped moving. Emily's at Lakewood Memorial, James said. That was all he said. He didn't need to say anything else. Within 8 minutes, the shop was empty of people. Within 15 minutes, the first bikes were on the road. Within 22 minutes, James Carter was at the front of a line of riders that stretched back nearly a quarter mile, all of them moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with intimidation and everything to do with the particular terrible clarity that descends on people who love someone and have been told that someone is in danger. Back inside the hospital, Emily was walking beside Damien Cross toward room 417. She had already made 3 decisions. The first decision was that she was not going to help him reach Ethan Cole. The second decision was that she was going to buy as much time as she could, because time was the resource that mattered most right now. And every minute she delayed was a minute for police to set up, for other staff to get patients to safety, for the situation to resolve in some direction that didn't involve more people getting hurt. The third decision was harder. She had recognized the name Damien Cross, not from news coverage, not from law enforcement briefings, from a conversation she had overheard 12 years ago in her father's house, sitting at the top of the stairs the way she used to sit when she was young. And she knew the men downstairs were talking about something important, and she was too curious to go to sleep. She had been 19 then, old enough to understand most of what she heard. And what she had heard was her father and 2 other men talking about a mercenary contractor named Cross, who had been hired to burn down the investigation that had cost a criminal network several $1 million and several of its highest-level associates. The investigation that her father's chapter had helped build. She hadn't thought about that conversation in years. She was thinking about it very hard now. Because if Damien Cross was here, in this hospital, looking for Ethan Cole, it meant this wasn't random. It meant this wasn't just a targeted retrieval of a protected witness. It meant someone with resources and a long memory had put together a very specific operation that connected the criminal network from 12 years ago to an intelligence contractor named Ethan Cole to Lakewood Memorial Medical Center. And it meant that Emily might not be an accidental hostage. She turned that thought over carefully. She didn't show it on her face. She kept walking. Beside her, Damien said, "You're quiet." "I'm thinking," Emily said. "About what?" "About whether you've thought through your exit strategy," she said. "Because right now, the police have had enough time to set up on all 4 sides of this building, which means you have fewer options than you think you do." Damien glanced at her sideways. "You're coaching me?" "I'm pointing out a tactical reality," Emily said. "Because if you panic, people die, including potentially your own people. And a dead body count on your side of this equation doesn't help whatever outcome you're actually working toward." Damien was quiet for a moment. "You don't talk like a nurse," he said. "I grew up around people who thought practically," Emily said. It wasn't a lie. They reached the door of room 417. Damien pushed it open. Ethan Cole was in the bed, and when he saw the armed men, his face went through several changes, very fast shock. Recognition, something that might have been resignation. He was bandaged across his left shoulder, and his color was bad, the gray-white of someone who had lost blood recently and not fully recovered, and Emily could see immediately that his blood pressure monitor was showing numbers she didn't like. "He's Cross," Ethan said. His voice was rough. "Of course it's Cross." "You know each other," Emily said. She was not surprised, but she said it anyway to get them talking, because men who are talking are not yet doing other things. "Old professional acquaintance," Damien said. He had released Emily's arm when they entered the room, and he was now standing at the foot of Ethan's bed with his arms at his sides, and his posture completely relaxed in the way that predators are relaxed when they have what they want. You've caused me a remarkable amount of trouble, Ethan. Seems like your own choices caused you the trouble, Ethan said. Damien tilted his head. You sound like a man who thinks this ends well for him. I sound like a man who knows what I know, Ethan said. And what I know doesn't disappear because you put a bullet in me. Everything's already been transferred, already been copied. You're too late. The temperature in the room changed. Emily watched Damien's expression carefully. She had been watching his face since the moment she met him, cataloging what she saw there, because reading a person's face accurately was a survival skill, and she had been practicing it since childhood. And what she saw in Damien's face when Ethan said those words was not the controlled blankness of a professional who had expected this. It was the tight compression around the eyes and mouth of someone who had hoped this wasn't true and was now facing the confirmation that it was. He hadn't been sure. He had come here thinking there was still a chance, still a window, still a possibility that Ethan Cole hadn't fully handed over whatever he was carrying. Ethan had just told him there wasn't, which meant Emily understood with cold clarity that the original mission objective, retrieve Ethan Cole and the information he held, was no longer achievable. And when a mission objective becomes unachievable, men like Damien Cross don't stop. They change objectives. She shifted her weight slightly, centering herself the way her father had taught her when she was 15 in the gravel lot behind the clubhouse, practicing how to stand so that you could move in any direction without telegraphing which direction you'd chosen. She was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Outside, on the street below, she heard something she hadn't heard since she was a teenager. A sound that was not quite like anything else in the world. Motorcycles. Not 1 or 2. Many, and she knew with a certainty that ran all the way down to her bones exactly who had arrived. The sound hit the 4th floor before anyone could explain it, and it was the kind of sound that doesn't need explanation, because it carries its own meaning in the chest of anyone who has ever stood near it. Not 1 engine, not 5. Dozens of them, overlapping, rolling toward the building in a low, sustained growl that Emily felt in her sternum before she consciously processed what it was. Damien heard it too. He moved to the window without thinking, which was the first instinctive, uncontrolled thing Emily had seen him do since she met him. And that small crack in his discipline told her something important. He was rattled. He hadn't expected this variable. What is that? He said. And the question was not directed at anyone in particular, which meant it was directed at himself. And a man asking himself questions out loud was a man whose plan was developing unexpected holes. Emily said nothing. Ethan Cole from the bed made a sound that might have been a laugh if he'd had the breath for it. That, he said, is a problem you didn't account for. Damien turned from the window. And his face had reorganized itself back into the controlled mask. But it took a half-second longer than it should have. And Emily caught the delay. Nobody is coming in here, he said. We control the building. You control 1 floor, Emily said quietly. And you've had it for less than 20 minutes. He looked at her sharply. How many floors did your team secure? She continued. And her voice was even and analytical. Not challenging. Just methodical. The way a person sounds when they are genuinely trying to understand a situation rather than win an argument. Because a building this size with a staff that's been in lockdown protocol for going on 30 minutes now means your window was always smaller than you thought. Damien stared at her. One of the men he'd brought, a heavy-set man with a flat nose who Emily had privately cataloged as the least controlled of the 3. The one most likely to act before thinking took a step toward her. You need to stop talking, he said. Let her talk, Damien said, which surprised everyone in the room, including, briefly, Emily. The heavy-set man stopped. His name, Emily would learn later, was Briggs. And he had been working for Damien Cross for 4 years. And in those 4 years, he had never once heard Damien tell him to let a civilian keep talking. He looked at his employer with something that was almost resentment and filed it away. Damien walked back toward Emily and Ethan's bedside, and he stood between them, and he was doing the thing that intelligent, dangerous men do when a situation shifts. He was recalculating. He's not panicking, not abandoning the operation, recalculating. Emily watched it happen in real time and respected it the way you can respect something that frightens you. "It's the motorcycle club," Damien said. It wasn't a question. Emily kept her face neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "You gave me a false name," he said. "Emily Mitchell." That's not your last name, is it? A beat. Just long enough to confirm what he already suspected before she answered. Yes, it's my mother's maiden name. And your actual name. Carter, she said. Because there was no longer any tactical advantage in the lie, and sometimes the truth lands harder than deception when you let it drop at exactly the right moment. Damien was still for a full 3 seconds. Then he let out a breath that was not quite a sigh and not quite a curse. Something in between, the sound a man makes when he realizes a mistake he cannot undo. James Carter's daughter, he said. Yes, you're James Carter's daughter and you're working as a nurse in a hospital. I'm a nurse who happens to be James Carter's daughter. Ease. Emily said. Ease. And the distinction mattered to her enough that she made it even now. Ease. Even here. Ease. Even with a gun 2 feet away. Those aren't the same thing. Ethan Cole had been watching this exchange with the focused attention of a man who understood that the conversation happening at the foot of his hospital bed might determine whether he lived through the afternoon. Ease. He shifted against his pillows. Ease. Winced as the movement pulled at his shoulder wound. Ease. And said, cross. Ease. Listen to me. You need to think very carefully about your next step here. I've been thinking carefully since I walked into this building, Damien said without looking at him. You walked in thinking you had a retrieval, Ethan said. In fast, contained. Grab me, get what I know, get out. That's already gone. You know that. So now you're standing in a hospital room with a hostage who turns out to be someone you really did not want to take hostage, with police outside and about 50 motorcycles outside, and your 2 men covering the other side of this floor are about to run out of reasons to stay calm. So I'm asking you, as someone who's been in collapsed operations before, what's your actual endgame right now? The room was very quiet. Damien looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then he looked at Emily. Why are you still here? He said. Not aggressive. Almost genuine. You figured out who I am. You know what's outside. You could have caused a scene in that hallway. Slowed me down. Screamed. Anything. Why didn't you? Emily had been waiting for that question. Because it was the question that revealed something about him, that he was still trying to understand her, he's still trying to categorize her, and a man who is trying to understand you is a man who is not entirely sure what he's dealing with, which meant he was not entirely sure what to do. Because screaming in a hospital ward full of post-surgical patients causes more immediate harm than walking with you does, she said. And because I needed to know what you were actually here for before I decided what to do about it. And now you know. I know enough. Damien crossed his arms. Your father's outside, I assumed. He's not going to wait forever. He's waited for things he cared about before, Emily said. He can be patient when it matters. That was true. It was one of the things people got wrong about James Carter. They assumed that the size of the man, the reputation, the decades of legend that had attached themselves to his name, meant that he operated on pure force and fury. He didn't. He had learned patience the hard way, through losses he never talked about and decisions that still kept him up at 2 a.m, and Emily had watched him sit perfectly still in dangerous situations for lengths of time that astonished everyone around him. He would wait, but he would not wait indefinitely. And when his patience ran out, what came after it was not rage. It was worse than rage. It was certainty. Down the hall, she could hear movement. Not the frantic movement of earlier, not the shuffling retreat of staff getting patients into rooms. This was something more deliberate. Someone, and she was willing to bet it was Priya, because Priya was braver than she gave herself credit for, was moving patients incrementally toward the emergency stairwell on the far east end of the floor, the one farthest from their current position. Damien heard it too. He snapped 2 fingers toward Briggs and jerked his head toward the hallway. And Briggs went to check, and Emily watched him go and quietly began shifting the geometry of the room in her mind. Who was where? What was between them? What was attached to what? Which of the pieces of medical equipment near Ethan's bed had weight to it and which were mostly plastic? Old habit. Old unwanted, completely automatic habit. You know what the irony is? Ethan said from the bed. And his voice had gotten slightly lower. Slightly more careful. The way voices get when pain is being managed through concentration. 12 years ago, when your employer was running that trafficking operation through the Northern Corridor, your job was to make sure nobody talked. You were very good at your job. But James Carter and his people had already been talking to the right investigators for 6 months before you showed up. You were always too late, Cross. You just didn't know it yet. Damien turned and looked at Ethan with an expression that was complicated in the way that expressions are when they contain more than one true feeling simultaneously. I know, he said. I've known for a long time. Emily looked at him. Something about his tone had shifted. Then why are you here? She asked. The question landed differently than she intended it to. Or maybe it landed exactly as she intended it. Because Damien Cross uncrossed his arms and looked at her and said nothing for a moment, and the silence had a quality she hadn't expected. It had the quality of a man who had been asked a question he'd been asking himself. Briggs came back to the doorway. There's a group of patients being moved toward the east stairwell. Doctor, somebody, and 2 nurses. You want me to No, Emily said immediately, and Damien looked at her with faint surprise. No, he agreed a half-second later. Let them go. Briggs stared at his employer. We're not here to hurt patients, Damien said, and his tone made clear that this was a statement he was not going to repeat or explain. Briggs went back out without a word. But Emily caught the look on his face as he turned. And it was not the look of a man who agreed with what he'd just been told. And that was a problem of a specific kind that she filed immediately. She said, you have a disagreement in your team. Every team has disagreements, Damien said. Not all of them are dangerous. He met her eyes. I can handle my people. I know you believe that, Emily said. And she did. She genuinely believed that Damien believed it. What she was less certain about was whether it was true. Because there is a difference between leading men who follow you from loyalty or genuine alignment and leading men who follow you from payment and convenience. And the moment payment stops buying cooperation, the moment the mission changes shape underneath them, and they realize what they signed up for is no longer what's happening, that gap between loyalty and contract has a way of becoming visible very fast. Out in the hallway, the intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't the hospital's internal system. This time it was someone patched in from outside. A voice came through the speakers on the 4th floor, clear and unhurried, with the particular quality of a man who has never once in his adult life felt the need to shout in order to be heard. This is James Carter. I'm outside. I'm going to stay outside. Nobody in that building is going to get hurt if I can help it, and I believe I can help it. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge in there, and I'd like to speak with my daughter to confirm she's all right. That's all I'm asking for right now. That's a small thing. Give me the small thing, and we'll figure out the rest together. The voice stopped. The hall was silent. Emily felt something move through her chest that she recognized, but couldn't name precisely. It was somewhere between relief and grief, which was a combination she associated strongly with her father. Had associated with him since she was old enough to understand that loving him meant knowing he existed in a world where harm was always possible. Damien was looking at the ceiling speaker as if he could see through it to the man outside. He sounds calm, Damien said. He is calm, Emily said. Men who are calm when their daughter is held at gunpoint are either very controlled or very confident. He's both, Emily said. He's been both for as long as I've known him. Damien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Briggs. His voice carried down the hall without effort. Get me a radio line to the officers outside. Briggs appeared in the doorway with an expression of open disbelief. You want to negotiate? I want information, Damien said. There's a difference. There's not that much of a difference from where I'm standing. Briggs said. And Emily heard it clearly, the edge in his voice. The friction. The way a man sounds when he's reached the limit of something he's been managing for a while and is deciding whether to keep managing it. Damien heard it too. He turned and looked at Briggs directly. What passed between them in that look was not words and didn't need to be. Emily watched it happen, the established dominance being tested. The employee calculating risk versus benefit. The employer communicating consequence without stating it, and she watched Briggs make his decision, which was to pull back, to step down from the edge he'd been standing on, to hand over the radio and let Damien make the call. For now, Damien took the radio and pressed the transmit button. This is Cross. I'm inside. You have police, you have motorcycles, and now I have a radio. Let's talk. A pause, then the voice that came back was not a police negotiator. It was James Carter. Mr. Cross. James said. And he had clearly been handed the radio by someone, or simply taken it, which was consistent with everything Emily knew about how her father operated. I appreciate you picking up. I didn't have a lot of other options, Damien said, which was honest in a way that surprised Emily slightly. You have more than you think, James said. Most situations have more exits than people see in the moment. That's been my experience. You're a man who plans, I understand that. Which means you're a man who can see options if you look at them clearly. Your daughter is in the room with me, Damien said. I need you to know that. I know that, James said. And his voice didn't change. Which cost him something Emily knew he wasn't showing. I'd like to hear from her. Damien looked at Emily. He held the radio out. She took it. Dad, she said. 3 seconds of silence from the other end. You okay, baby? James said. And his voice had dropped to a register that Emily recognized as the one he used only when there were no witnesses. Or when he had stopped caring about witnesses. Which happened when he was frightened enough. I'm fine, Emily said. I'm working. A beat. You're working, he repeated. There are patients up here. I'm keeping them stable. Another silence, shorter this time. That sounds exactly like you. James said. And there was something in it that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. Something compressed and private that she heard and understood and that nobody else on the radio frequency would have been able to decode. Is anyone hurt? Not from our side, she said carefully. A pause. I'm not going anywhere. I know, she said. Dad, tell them to give us more time. More time for what? He asked. She glanced at Damien. I'm working on something. Damien slowly reached over and took the radio from her hand. And she let him take it. And he pressed the transmit button and said, You raised a remarkable woman, Mr. Carter. A pause. I know I did, James said, which is why I need you to think very carefully about any decision you make in the next few minutes. The conversation ended. Damien set the radio down on the bedside table and looked at Emily with an expression she still couldn't fully read. You said you were working on something, he said. I said it to buy time, she said. That's not all you said it for. He replied. And he was right. And she didn't bother denying it. Because she was working on something. She had been working on it since they walked into this room, and she had first heard Briggs's voice take on that edge. There were 3 men in Damien's team. Damien Briggs, and a third man, younger, quieter, stationed at the elevator, who Emily had cataloged early on as uncertain. Not frightened, uncertain, which was different. A frightened man retreats. An uncertain man watches and waits and looks for permission to do the thing he's been considering. That third man had been watching Emily since they stepped onto this floor. Not with hostility, with something that looked much more like discomfort. She had seen that look before. In waiting rooms, in family members who had brought someone to the hospital against the person's will, and were beginning to wonder whether they'd made the right call. In people who were part of something and were starting to ask themselves when exactly they had agreed to this specific version of it. His name, she had gathered from 2 fragments of overheard conversation, was Marcus. Not a nickname, Marcus. And something about the name combined with the expression made her think about Gerald, down the hall in room 408, the retired teacher with the chocolate chip cookie grandson, who also happened to be named Marcus. She filed that coincidence away without knowing yet why she was filing it. Ethan Cole had been very quiet for the last several minutes, which Emily noticed and deliberately did not address. Because Ethan Cole being quiet meant Ethan Cole was either sleeping possible given his blood pressure numbers, or thinking much more likely given everything she had observed about him. You knew each other before today, she said to Ethan, and it wasn't a question. Ethan opened his eyes. Cross and I? Before whatever happened that put you here. Ethan and Damien looked at each other across the hospital bed with an expression Emily recognized as the specific weight of shared history between 2 people who had been on the same side of something and weren't anymore. We worked the same circuit, Ethan said carefully. Intelligence contracting. Years ago. Same employer? Emily asked. Employers, Damien said, and his voice had a flatness to it that communicated a boundary. But Ethan pushed past it. We worked for people who shared resources and objectives. There was a period where Cross and I crossed paths professionally several times. We were not friends, but we understood each other. And then, Emily asked, Ethan said, and then I started seeing things I couldn't unsee. And I made choices about what to do with what I saw. Damien said. He made choices that cost a lot of people a lot of money and a lot of freedom. People who deserve to lose both, Ethan said without heat. That's a judgment call, Damien said. Ethan agreed. It is, and I made it. Emily looked between them. She asked Damien, when you saw the same things he saw, what did you do? The question sat in the room for a long time. Damien did not answer it. He didn't need to. The fact that he was standing here, in this hospital, on behalf of people who wanted Ethan Cole silenced, was its own answer. And Emily could see on his face that he knew she'd read the answer without him giving it, and she could see something else there too. Something that wasn't guilt, exactly, but was in the general neighborhood of guilt. The shadow a thing casts when it passes close enough to matter. She thought about something her father had said to her once, years ago, when she was still young enough to ask him the simple, direct questions that children ask, before they learn that most adults prefer the complicated, indirect version. She had asked him, Dad, have you ever done something bad? And James Carter had looked at her for a long moment, and then he had said, I've done things I can justify and things I can't. The ones I can't justify, I try not to repeat. That's the most honest answer I can give you. She had thought about that answer many times over the years. She was thinking about it now. Then Briggs came through the door, and the moment shattered. He wasn't walking the way he had been walking before. He was moving differently, faster, tighter, with a kind of compressed urgency that Emily's body read before her mind processed it. And she shifted her weight automatically. We have a problem, Briggs said, and he wasn't talking to Damien. He was talking to the room, the third team, Valdez and Rourke. They've been on the second floor this whole time. They just told me they're pulling out. Said the situation's compromised, and they're not going to wait around to be taken in by the cops. Damien's expression didn't change. Tell them to hold their position. As I told them, Briggs said. They said no. Silence. Then it's just us, Damien said. Just us, Briggs repeated, and his voice had something in it that wasn't fear and wasn't loyalty. It was arithmetic. He was calculating something, and Emily could see him calculating it, and she did not like the shape the calculation was taking. Briggs, Damien said, and his voice had a warning in it. I signed up for a retrieval, Briggs said. Not for a standoff with James Carter's Brotherhood outside the window and half my team gone. Nothing's changed, Damien said. Everything's changed, Briggs said. And you know it. The two men looked at each other across the room. And Emily moved, not toward the door, not toward Ethan. She moved to the far side of Ethan's bed, and she put herself between Ethan and Briggs, and she did it smoothly enough that it looked like she was simply checking his monitors, which she actually was doing simultaneously, because the numbers on his blood pressure readout had moved in a direction she didn't like, and she adjusted the IV drip rate by a precise amount and kept her hands steady and her eyes on both men. His blood pressure is dropping, she said, loudly enough that the medical information cut through the room like a different kind of alarm. Whatever you two are deciding, I need a decision in the next 90 seconds. Because after that, this man goes into shock, and the conversation you're having becomes irrelevant, because you'll have a dead body in this bed, and everything that follows from that is worse for everyone in this room. Both men looked at her. Ethan looked at her too. How bad? Ethan asked. He's manageable if I start managing it now, Emily said. He's not manageable if I wait. Then manage it. Damien said. And he turned back to Briggs. And Emily turned to Ethan's monitors and began working. And she was doing two things simultaneously, the way she had always done. Two things simultaneously. She was keeping Ethan alive, and she was listening to every word being spoken behind her. What she heard was Damien and Briggs conducting a negotiation of their own, quiet and rapid, and with the particular cadence of men who had worked together long enough to have shorthand. She heard Damien say something about the exit they had planned. She heard Briggs say that exit was gone. She heard Damien say there was a secondary. She heard Briggs say the secondary was covered, and then she heard Damien go quiet in a way that told her he was recalculating again, more seriously this time. She adjusted Ethan's IV and said quietly, close to his ear, can you walk if you have to? Ethan turned his head slightly toward her, not fast. Fast enough to get to the east stairwell? A pause. Maybe, if someone's helping me. Okay, she said. Stay with me. She straightened up, turned back toward Damien and Briggs, and she said, I have a suggestion. Both men looked at her. There's a service elevator on the north end of this floor, she said. It goes directly to the basement loading bay. The loading bay has an exit that comes out behind the building, which is not where the police have concentrated, because the primary approach is from the main entrance. I know this because I've used that elevator to transport equipment after deliveries. Damien stared at her. Why are you telling me this? He asked, and it was the second time he had asked her a version of that question, and the fact that he kept asking it told her he genuinely didn't understand her and was genuinely trying to. Because Emily said, Ethan Cole needs a hospital. Not this hospital somewhere, he can't be found again, but an actual medical facility. Because if that shoulder wound isn't properly managed, he's going to lose the arm or worse. Because Briggs is about 3 minutes away from making a decision that gets people killed. And because my father has 40 men outside this building who are patient enough to wait, but not patient enough to wait forever. And when they stop waiting, the math on people surviving this changes significantly. He's a pause. So you're negotiating, Damien said. I'm being practical, Emily said. Those aren't always different things. Damien looked at her for a long measuring moment. Then he looked at Briggs. Then he looked at the window. Then he looked at Emily again. What do you want? He asked. Everyone walks out of this building alive, she said. That's what I want. All of my patients, all of your people. Ethan, you, everyone. And me? What happens to me when I walk out that door? That, Emily said carefully, depends on what you're willing to do in the next 10 minutes. Damien Cross stood in room 417 of Lakewood Memorial Medical Center and looked at the daughter of James Carter. And he thought about something for a moment that nobody in the room could see. Then from the hallway, came the sound of Marcus the Young, uncertain third man calling out in a voice that had lost its control entirely. Cross. Cross, you need to come out here right now. Someone's inside the building. Someone's already inside. Damien moved toward the door. Emily moved with him, because whatever was happening next, she was not going to be left behind. Marcus was not the kind of man who scared easily, and Emily had cataloged that about him in the first 10 minutes of observing him. He was young and he was uncertain, but he had the body language of someone who had been trained out of flinching. So, when his voice cracked on the words, someone's already inside, the effect on everyone in room 417 was immediate and physical, the way a sudden noise in a dark room hits you before you've processed what made it. Damien was through the door before anyone else moved. Emily followed him into the hallway, and she was close enough that when he stopped abruptly, she nearly walked into his back. Marcus was at the far end of the corridor near the elevator bank, and he was not looking at the elevator. He was looking at the ceiling, specifically at a ceiling tile that was slightly displaced. Emily knew exactly which tile that was, the maintenance access point above the supply area on the east end of the floor, the one she had helped a repair technician use 14 months ago. The one she had filed away in the back of her mind the moment she stepped off the elevator with Damien and his men and started calculating options. Someone had found it before she'd had the chance to use it herself. Damien looked at the displaced tile. He looked at Emily. His expression asked the question without words. I didn't tell anyone about it, she said honestly. But I'm not the only person who works on this floor. A soft sound from above, not a crash, not a scramble, just the careful, controlled movement of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Damien raised his weapon toward the ceiling. Don't, Emily said, and her voice came out with a sharpness that surprised even her. There are water lines and electrical conduits up there. You fire a weapon into that space, and you create 4 different kinds of emergency simultaneously. Damien hesitated. That half-second hesitation told her everything she needed to know about where his head was. Who's up there? He called toward the ceiling. Silence. Then a voice came down through the gap in the tile, and Emily recognized it instantly, not because she had heard it in years, but because some voices embed themselves in childhood memory and stay there regardless of time or distance. You must be Cross, the voice said. I've heard about you. It was not James Carter. It was Ray Tillman, who had been her father's second for 15 years, who was the closest thing to an Uncle Emily had ever had outside of blood, who had a laugh like a truck engine and hands that could disassemble a carburetor in the dark, and who Emily had not seen in 3 years, and who was apparently currently inside the ceiling of the 4th floor of her hospital. She pressed her lips together very hard to prevent herself from saying his name. Please come down, Damien said, slowly. In a minute, Ray said pleasantly. I'm having a look around first. Nice hospital you're tearing up. We haven't torn up anything, Damien said. Not yet, Ray said. I'm optimistic about your intentions. Briggs had appeared at the end of the hall from the opposite direction. And Emily could see him working through the arithmetic of the situation man in the ceiling. Limited visibility. multiple unknowns, and she could see it pushing him toward a decision she needed to interrupt. Ray, she said, and she'd made the calculation that using his name was better than letting Briggs get trigger happy. Please, come down. A brief pause from above. Please. Hey, Please, Ray said. Please. And his voice shifted into something warmer and more ordinary. Please. The voice of a man who had watched her grow up and was now mildly exasperated to find her in the middle of a hostage situation. Please, you all right up here? I'm fine, she said. Come down. Another pause. Then the ceiling tile shifted fully aside, and Ray Tillman descended from the access panel with the particular efficiency of a large man who had learned to move carefully through small spaces. He landed without any drama and straightened up to his full height, which was considerable, and he was not carrying a visible weapon, which Emily knew meant nothing in terms of whether he was armed. Ray looked at Damian Cross with the calm, unhurried assessment of a man who has spent decades in rooms with dangerous people and long ago stopped finding the experience remarkable. You're smaller than I expected, Ray said. People say that, Damian replied. They're usually surprised, Ray said. They stop being surprised pretty quickly. Ray almost smiled. Fair enough, he looked at Emily. Your dad wants to know if you need anything. He said to ask specifically about your needs. His word needs. I think he was trying to be professional about it. Emily felt something move through her chest that she absolutely did not have time for right now. Tell him I need 20 more minutes. For what? Ray asked. I'm working on something. Ray looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of someone who has known you since you were 8 years old and can tell the difference between when you have a plan and when you're improvising and who. In this case, clearly couldn't tell which one it was. Does your working on something involve this man releasing you and your patients and walking out of this building peacefully? Ray asked. That's the goal, Emily said. Ray looked at Damian. Is that the goal from your side too? Damian was very quiet for a moment. It's becoming the goal, he said, and it was the most honest thing Emily had heard him say since he grabbed her arm on this floor over an hour ago. Ray nodded slowly. Okay, he said. He pulled a phone from his jacket pocket and sent a text without looking at the screen, which meant he had typed something he had already prepared. 20 minutes, but I'm staying up here on this floor. No, Damian said. Yes, Ray said, with the same easy certainty he had said everything else. And there was nothing aggressive in it. No threat. No posturing. Just a man stating a fact about what was going to happen and being very relaxed about it. I'm not going back up into that ceiling and I'm not leaving this floor. You can work with that or you can make this harder. But making it harder costs you time, and time is the thing you have least of right now. Damian and Ray looked at each other for a long moment. Then Damian made a sound that wasn't quite agreement but wasn't refusal either. And he turned and walked back toward room 417. And Emily followed. And Ray fell into step behind them both. And nobody said anything about the fact that the power dynamic in the hallway had just shifted in a way that would have been difficult to articulate, but was felt by everyone present. Back in the room, Ethan Cole had not moved. His color was slightly better. The IV adjustment had helped but not good, and Emily went directly to his monitors because she needed to check, and because having something to do with her hands helped her think. Who is that? Ethan asked quietly, looking at Ray. Family, Emily said. Ray positioned himself near the window without being asked, which put him between the door and Ethan's bed. And he did it so naturally that it looked like he had simply found a comfortable place to stand. And only Emily and possibly Damian recognized it for the tactical positioning it was. Damian stood in the center of the room and looked at the floor for a moment, and then he looked up, and his expression had the particular quality of a decision being made, not the first step of a decision, but the final one, the step after the weighing. I need to tell you something, he said, and he was looking at Emily when he said it. About why I'm actually here. Briggs, who had followed them back into the room, made a sharp sound. Cross Briggs, Damian said. Stop. Briggs stopped. The room waited. Damian pulled up a chair from the corner and sat down, which was unexpected, and sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped in front of him, which made him look less like a mercenary and more like a man in a waiting room, and Emily filed that image carefully. 6 months ago, Damian said, my employer came to me with a contract. Find Ethan Cole, retrieve documentation he'd been compiling. He's neutralized the threat he represented to the network. He paused. I've done jobs like this before. I've done jobs significantly worse than this before. I said yes. I put a team together and I started working the problem. He looked at Ethan. What I didn't know when I said yes was that my employer had already decided the contract included more than just Cole. There was a list. Cole was number one, but the list went to 12 names. And some of the names on that list were not intelligence contractors or investigators or former colleagues who'd switched sides. A silence. Who were they? Emily asked. Damien looked at her steadily. People who had testified in the original investigation. People who had provided evidence. People who had 12 years ago helped bring charges against the network. He paused again. These people your father knew. Emily went very still. Ray by the window. He's had gone still too. And he was now watching Damien with a different quality of attention than before. Not the easy appraisal of a few minutes ago, but something focused and cold and very serious. These names, Ray said. It wasn't a request. I don't have all of them, Damien said. I saw part of the list. 3 names I recognized. Your father was not on it, I think. Because whoever built this contract understood that putting James Carter's name on a kill list was a different kind of problem than the others. But men close to him, he looked at Emily. Men who were there 12 years ago. Emily thought about her father sitting at that long table in the old house. She thought about the names she had heard over the years, the men who were as much a part of her childhood as Sunday dinners and engine grease. Why are you telling me this? She asked. And it was the third time in this conversation one of them had asked the other that question. And the third time it meant something different. Because Damien said, I walked into this building today planning to finish a contract. And somewhere between grabbing your arm in that hallway and sitting in this room, listening to you keep a dying man's blood pressure stable while negotiating with professional calm, I started thinking about the list. And I realized that what I had been hired to do and what I was willing to do were no longer the same thing. The room held that for a moment. You're saying you want out, Ethan said from the bed. I'm saying I want to do something about what I know, Damien said. Which is different. Not that different, Ethan said. Enough different, Damien said. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for anyone to decide I'm a good person. I'm saying that I have information that can dismantle the rest of what I helped build toward, and I'm deciding that the people outside this window and the woman standing next to this bed are better recipients of that information than my employer. Briggs made a sound from the back of the room that was low and contemptuous. Damien turned to look at him. This is where you and I stop working together, Damien said quietly. And I need you to decide how that happens. Briggs looked at him for a long moment. You're throwing everything away, Briggs said. For what, for a nurse? For a choice, Damien said. I haven't made many of those in the last 10 years. I'm making one now. Briggs looked around the room at Ray by the window. At Emily by the monitors. At Ethan in the bed. At Damien sitting with his hands loose in front of him, and he ran his calculations one final time. And Emily could see the moment he arrived at his answer, because his shoulders dropped slightly and his jaw set in the particular way of someone who has decided they don't like their options, but has chosen the one with the best odds. I'm walking out, Briggs said. Not for you. Not for anyone in this room. Because this operation is done and I'm not taking a federal charge for a client who isn't paying me enough to care. Walk out the east stairwell, Emily said. Tell the officers you're surrendering peacefully and keep your hands visible the entire time. Briggs looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between resentment and reluctant respect. You're going to make a great warden someday, he said, and then he walked out of the room. Ray watched him go and then looked at Emily with one eyebrow raised. He'll be fine, Emily said. He's calculating his own survival. That makes him predictable. Your father says exactly that about people, Ray said. Emily didn't respond to that. Marcus appeared in the doorway seconds after Briggs left, and he looked younger in that moment than he had all afternoon. And Emily could see on his face the particular expression of someone who has been holding tension for hours and has just had it release all at once. Not in a clean way, but in the way that leaves you slightly unsteady. Briggs went to the stairwell, Marcus said, and Rourke and Valdez are already in custody on the second floor. Police came through 20 minutes ago. Damien absorbed this without visible reaction. It's just you, Emily said to him. It's just me, he agreed. And you're going to give Ray what you know. I'm going to give whoever needs to have it what I know, he said. But yes, through him, if that's how it works. Ray moved away from the window and sat down across from Damien, and there was a moment of eye contact between the two men that lasted long enough to be significant. Two people from entirely different worlds taking the measure of each other and arriving, Emily thought, at something close to provisional respect. Talk, Ray said. Damien talked. He talked for 11 minutes, and Emily listened to every word while she monitored Ethan Cole and kept her hands busy with the 1,000 small adjustments that keeping a wounded man stable requires. And what she heard over those 11 minutes was a thread that ran from the present moment backward through 12 years of organized crime, contracted violence, and deliberate erasure of people who had tried to do what Ethan Cole had eventually done, tell the truth to the right people at the right time. She heard names. She heard locations. She heard the name of the man who had hired Damien Cross. And when she heard it, her hands paused for exactly 1 second on Ethan's IV line before continuing. Because the name was one she recognized, and she recognized it from a case that Rosa Mendez had mentioned to her father 2 years ago that she had assumed was resolved. It wasn't resolved. It had merely moved. Ray had his phone out and was typing with his thumbs, sending what Emily assumed was a message directly to her father, who would pass it to Rosa Mendez, who would pass it to whatever federal department dealt with the specific kind of network Damien was describing. The information was already moving before the conversation was finished. When Damien stopped talking, the room was quiet for a moment. Is that all of it? Ray asked. Everything I know, Damien said. There's documentation, encrypted. I can give the key. Write it down, Ray said, and produced a small notebook from his jacket pocket with the practiced ease of a man who had been taking notes at important conversations for decades. Damien wrote for 3 minutes. He pushed the notebook back to Ray. Ray looked at it, closed it, pocketed it. Okay, Ray said. Here's what happens next. Marcus from the doorway said. Can I ask something? Everyone looked at him. Why did you sign up for this? He said to Damien. And his voice had the particular directness of someone who has been carrying a question for a while and has decided the moment to ask it has arrived. Not this specific contract. All of it. The whole thing. You're clearly not someone who needed the money badly enough. So why? Damien looked at the young man in the doorway for a moment. Because I was good at it, he said. And I told myself that was enough of a reason for a very long time. Marcus absorbed this. When did it stop being enough? Marcus asked. About an hour ago, Damien said, in a hallway on this floor. When a woman whose arm I was holding told me that people needed her more than they needed to see her panic. Emily felt something shift in the room. She looked at Damien. That's not a reason to change everything, she said carefully. One moment isn't enough, I know, Damien said, but one moment is usually where it starts. She thought about her father again, about the conversation she'd never heard all of but had heard enough of years ago at the top of the stairs. About the investigation that had cost the criminal network its infrastructure. About the specific moment her father had decided, and she did believe it had been a specific moment, not a gradual drift, that what he knew was more important kept to himself than shared with people who could do something with it. One moment, where it starts, she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, Ray, can you get a message to my dad? I already have several messages in transit to your dad, Ray said. Tell him Ethan Cole needs a medical transfer, not back to the system that had him here somewhere new. And tell him I need someone to sit with Gerald Marsh in room 408 because he was alone when this started and he's been alone this whole time. Ray stared at her. Gerald Marsh, the patient, he's 73 and he's had a hip replacement and he's been by himself in there since this started and nobody has checked on him. Ray looked at her for a long moment, then he sent the message. Marcus from the doorway made a sound that might have been a laugh. What? Emily said. Nothing, Marcus said. Just you've been running this whole operation from inside it for the last hour and a half, and you just stopped to worry about a 73-year-old's hip replacement. His hip replacement is my responsibility, Emily said. So is everything else. They're not separate categories. Marcus nodded slowly, and then all of it happened at once. Not in the planned, sequential way that Emily had been managing the last 90 minutes, not in the careful step of a person keeping multiple variables moving in the right direction, but in the sudden compressed way that crises conclude when they reach their end, all the held energy releasing at once into motion. The radio on the bedside table crackled. It was Rosa Mendez, not James Carter, and her voice was professional and quick. We have 4 individuals in custody on floors 1 through 3. Floor 4. I need a status update. Emily reached for the radio before Damien could and pressed transmit. Floor 4 is clear, she said. 1 individual willing to cooperate with authorities. 1 critical medical patient requiring immediate transfer. 1 nurse who is going to need a very long break after this. A pause on the other end, Emily, Rosa said. Detective Mendez, Emily said. Yes, is everyone alive up there? Everyone is alive up here. Another pause. Your father, Rosa said, is going to be insufferable about this for years. I know, Emily said. Then she set the radio down and looked at Damien Cross, who was still sitting in the chair with his hands loose in front of him. And she said, when the officers come up here, keep your hands visible and do exactly what they say. Don't try to explain anything until you have legal representation. The information you gave Ray is already moving. You don't need to perform cooperation. You just need to not make this harder. Damien looked at her. You're coaching me again, he said. Force of habit, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you an apology, he said. You owe a lot of people a lot of things, Emily said. Start with them. Work your way around, he nodded. The elevator at the end of the hall opened. Emily heard boots, the specific cadence of law enforcement moving fast but controlled, and she looked at Ray, who had put himself near the door in a position that was simultaneously non-threatening and clearly communicative of who was in this room and who wasn't a threat, and she appreciated it without saying so because there was no time. 2 officers came through first, then Rosa Mendez. And behind Rosa Mendez, filling the hallway with a presence that didn't require any effort or performance, was James Carter. He was not wearing his cut. He was in a plain gray jacket and dark jeans, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man in his late 50s who was very large and very steady and who had clearly been standing outside a hospital for the last 2 hours not doing the thing his instinct told him to do because he trusted his daughter enough to wait. He stopped in the doorway. Emily looked at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Because some things don't start with words. They start in the chest. In the particular recognition of a person you love being safe when you were not certain they would be. And that recognition doesn't move through language, it moves through the body first. Then James Carter crossed the room and put his arms around his daughter. And Emily let him. And she pressed her face against his shoulder for exactly 4 seconds before she straightened up, because 4 seconds was what she allowed herself. And then she said, Dad, Ethan Cole needs a transfer, and someone needs to check on Gerald in 408. James looked at her. Then he laughed. And it was the real laugh. The one from deep in his chest. The one she had grown up falling asleep to from the room above the living room. And Ray made a sound of exasperated affection from near the window. And Rosa Mendez was already moving toward Ethan Cole's bed with a purpose that suggested she had been coordinating the medical transfer for the last 20 minutes. Gerald in 408, James repeated. Your first request. After all of this. He was alone, Emily said. Her father shook his head slowly. And he was still half laughing. And he said, I raised you right. And Emily looked at him and thought about everything that sentence contained and didn't contain. All the complexity of it. All the years of it. And she said, yeah, Dad. You did okay. Across the room. Damien Cross stood up slowly from his chair when the officers approached him. And he kept his hands visible. And he said nothing except yes, and I understand. And when they walked him toward the door, he paused for a half second and looked back at Emily. She met his eyes. Something passed between them that neither of them could have explained to anyone else in that room. Not gratitude exactly. Not forgiveness. Not resolution. Something smaller and more honest than all of those. Something that acknowledged that 2 people had been in a very difficult space together and had both chosen, in their own ways, not to make it worse. Then he walked out. And Emily turned back to her patient and adjusted his IV line and checked his monitor readings and told Ethan Cole in a steady, quiet voice that a medical transport was being arranged and that he was going to be all right. She said it the way she always said it, like she meant it, because she did. The medical transport team arrived at 4:57 in the afternoon, and Emily stood in the hallway and watched them work with the particular attention of a nurse who had just spent 3 hours improvising critical care in a compromising environment and needed to confirm with her own eyes that the handoff was clean. Ethan Cole's blood pressure had stabilized enough for transport. His shoulder was managed. His pain was controlled. She had done what she could with what she had, and now other hands were taking over, and she stood at the edge of the activity and let them. Rosa Mendez appeared at her elbow. "You should sit down," Rosa said. "I'm fine standing," Emily said. "You've been on your feet for 4 hours in an active hostage situation," Rosa said. "Sit down." Emily looked at her. "In a minute, she said. Which was what she always said when people told her to rest. And Rosa Mendez, who had known James Carter long enough to recognize the specific stubbornness that apparently ran in the family, did not push it further. "I need to ask you some questions," Rosa said instead. "When you're ready. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest. We're going to be building the federal case, and what you observed in that room over the last several hours is going to matter." "I know," Emily said. "I'll be ready tonight." Rosa nodded. She started to move away, then stopped. "That thing you did in there, the way you managed Cross, kept Cole alive, got information moving before we even had access to the floor." She paused, choosing words carefully. "Where did you learn to do that?" Emily watched the transport team lift Ethan's gurney with coordinated precision. "He's had a good teacher," she said. Rosa didn't ask who. She already knew. The transport moved down the hall, and Emily followed it as far as the elevator. And when the doors closed, she stood there for a moment, with her hand still extended toward the button she hadn't pressed. And she breathed. 1 breath. 2. The kind of breathing she did after difficult cases when she needed to discharge what she'd been carrying and make room for what came next. Then she turned and walked to room 408. Gerald Marsh was in his bed exactly where she'd left him, and he was awake. And when she pushed the door open, he looked at her with the expression of a man who had been listening to sirens and boots and radio voices for 3 hours from a hospital room and had assembled a fairly complete picture of what had happened without being told any of it directly. "You all right?" he said, and his voice had the gentle directness of a man who had spent 40 years teaching children and knew how to ask the real question without dressing it up. "I'm all right," Emily said. "You don't look all right." "I'm better than I was an hour ago," she said. Which was true. And she moved to his monitor and checked his readings by habit. And they were fine. And she adjusted his blanket because it had slipped. "Was it bad?" Gerald asked. Emily looked at his monitor numbers for a moment. "It could have been worse," she said. "It didn't go that way." "Because of you?" "Because a lot of people made choices to pull it in a better direction," she said. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Your father came by," he said. "About 20 minutes ago. Large man, gray jacket. He stood at the door and he didn't say much, just asked if I'd been taken care of. I told him you'd looked after me before things got complicated." He nodded. Emily kept her eyes on the monitor. "And then he said," Gerald continued, "that he had a daughter who would walk into a fire to make sure everybody else got out first, and that it was the most terrifying and most proud he'd ever been of anyone in his life." He paused. He seemed like a man carrying a lot at once. Emily pressed her lips together. "Yeah," she said. "He usually is." She stayed with Gerald for 7 more minutes, checked his hip incision through the bandaging, answered his questions about when he could expect to eat something that wasn't hospital food, and listened to the beginning of a story about his Little League team that she was fairly certain she'd heard 4 times now, but which she let run its course, because Gerald Marsh had spent 3 hours alone in a hospital room during an armed standoff, and he deserved to talk about baseball if he wanted to. When she finally stepped back into the hallway, Ray Tillman was leaning against the wall outside the door. "How is he?" Ray said, jerking his chin toward Gerald's room. "Good," Emily said. "Hips healing well." "I meant how are you?" Ray said. She looked at him. Ray had the face of a man who had lived a life that left marks, and she had known that face since she was small enough that she used to fall asleep against his arm at chapter dinners. And seeing it now in this fluorescent hallway after this particular afternoon did something to her composure that she hadn't been prepared for. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Ray nodded. He didn't push. That was one of the things she had always valued about him. He understood the difference between someone who needed to be asked again and someone who had given you the real answer the first time. Cross is in federal custody, he said. They moved him about 40 minutes ago. Briggs, too. Marcus surrendered voluntarily on the second floor. Rosa says he may be looking at a cooperation arrangement given that he never actually threatened or touched anyone and appears to have been having second thoughts for most of the afternoon. He was, Emily said. I saw it early, she said as much. Also said you identified Briggs as the instability point before they had any read on the team dynamics. He looked at her. She was impressed. She doesn't impress easily, Emily said. No, Ray said. She doesn't. They stood in the hallway for a moment without talking, which was comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable between people who have known each other long enough that quiet doesn't need filling. Then Ray said, your dad wants to talk to you when you're ready. He's down at the end of the hall. There's a family lounge area they let him use. He's been there since they cleared the floor. He could have come to find me, Emily said. He figured you'd come when you were done, Ray said. He said, and I'm quoting this exactly because I thought you'd want to hear the phrasing. He said, she'll finish what she's doing first. That's who she is. I'll wait. Emily was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. Ray pushed off the wall and headed toward the elevator. He stopped after a few steps and looked back. What you did today keeping that floor running, managing Cross, getting the information out, keeping Cole alive. You did that. A lot of people helped, she said. A lot of people were standing in rooms doing what they were told, Ray said. You were the one connecting everything. Just take that. Let yourself take it. He kept walking. Emily stood in the hallway alone for a moment and thought about what Ray had said. She didn't take it exactly. She filed it. There would be time later days, probably weeks to process what had happened today, to understand it fully, to sit alone somewhere quiet and feel all the things she had been too busy to feel while they were happening. That was how it always worked. The professionals who functioned in crisis were not people without fear or feeling. They were people who had learned to defer those things temporarily and process them when the immediate demand was over. She knew that from nursing school, and she knew it from watching her father, and she knew it from her own body, which was now beginning to register the fatigue of several hours of sustained, high-level function in the particular way that bodies do when they finally get the signal that the emergency is done. Her legs were heavy. Her hands, when she held them up and looked at them, had a faint tremor. She lowered them and made a fist, then released it, then made it again. Then she started walking toward the family lounge at the end of the hall. James Carter was sitting in a chair that was too small for him, which made him look both large and somehow very human, and he had a paper cup of bad hospital coffee in his hands that he had clearly not been drinking. He looked up when Emily came through the door, and for a moment, his face did the thing it had done in room 417, that private, involuntary thing that only happened when the guard was down enough for the feeling to show through. He stood up. Emily sat down. She did it on purpose. If she stood, they would stand together, and she needed to not be standing right now. James understood this and sat back down, and he set the paper cup on the table between them, and he looked at his daughter with the full attention of a man who had been waiting to look at her from a safe distance for several hours, and was now allowing himself to do it properly. Gerald told me you introduced yourself to him, Emily said. James looked slightly guilty. He seemed like he'd been alone a while. He had. I just asked if he was okay. He told me what you said about me, Emily said. James was quiet for a moment. I might have said more than I intended to, he said. You said I would walk into a fire to make sure everybody else got out first, Emily said. And that it was the most terrifying and most proud you'd ever been. James looked at the cup. Both of those things are true, he said. I know, she said. They sat for a moment in the specific silence of a parent and a child who have had a long and complicated relationship, and who have arrived at a point in the afternoon where most of the things that have been complicated between them feel smaller than they did this morning. When Rosa called me, James said, and told me you might be one of the hostages, he stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. There is a particular kind of fear that comes when you find out someone you love is in danger and you are not there. I have felt that fear before, with your mother, with Ray years ago, with other people. He paused. It doesn't get easier to manage. It gets harder, because every time you feel it, you know what it means, you know what the worst version of it costs, and you can't pretend you don't know that. Emily looked at her father. I'm okay, Dad, she said. I know you're okay, he said. I can see you're okay. I'm telling you about the 40 minutes between the call and getting here, which were not okay. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be sorry immediately. Please, you did your job. You did it better than anyone had any right to expect. I'm just... He stopped again, and this time what came through in the pause was something she associated with the very few moments in her life when she had seen her father struggle to say the thing he actually meant instead of the easier version. I'm just telling you, because you should know that the people who love you were here the whole time, even when you couldn't see them. Emily felt something open up behind her sternum. I knew you were here, she said. The moment I heard the bikes, I knew. James nodded slowly. How did that feel knowing? She thought about it honestly. Like I could breathe again, she said. I had been breathing the whole time, obviously. But it felt like I could breathe differently. Like the breathing didn't have to be held in so much. James nodded again, like she'd said something he recognized. That's what family is supposed to do, he said. Emily looked at her father, and she thought about the years of distance between them, not geographical distance, though there had been that too, but the distance she had built deliberately, the one that she had called independence and autonomy and personal identity, and that had been all of those things, and also, if she was honest, partly something else. Partly a kind of self-protection, partly the thing a person does when they love something enough to be afraid of what it costs to love it, so they arrange their life to need it less. She had been arranging her life to need it less for a long time. Today had rearranged some of that arrangement. I want to tell you something, she said. Okay, James said. When I left the valley and changed my last name and built all of this, the career, the apartment, the whole life that had nothing to do with the clubhouse, it wasn't because I was ashamed of you. Or of where I came from. I know that, James said. And then, more quietly, I mostly know that. Mostly, she said. He looked at the coffee cup. There were years where it felt like you were erasing something. I understood why. I understood it in my head. But understanding something in your head and not feeling it somewhere else are different things. I know, she said. I never said anything because it wasn't my place to say anything. You had the right to build the life you wanted to build. But he paused. I missed you in the day-to-day way, the ordinary way, not dramatically, just in the way that you miss someone who used to be around and isn't. Emily felt the tremor come back in her hands, and she put them flat on her knees and pressed down. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it in a different and more specific way than she'd meant it before. I'm not asking you to be sorry, James said. I'm just telling you the truth because today seems like the right day for it. It does, she agreed. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Emily said, Damien Cross told me something about a list. James's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, not tension, exactly, but the particular kind of alertness that James Carter's body went into when a conversation moved into operational territory. Ray sent me the information, James said carefully. You knew about the list, Emily said. It wasn't quite a question. I knew that the network from 12 years ago had not fully dissolved, James said. I knew that some of its people were rebuilding under different structures. Rosa and I have been, he chose the word carefully. He's monitoring the situation. Emily stared at him. How long, she said. About 8 months, he said. 8 months, she repeated. And she stopped. Started again. There are people on that list. People I grew up around. Did they know? James said. The ones I could tell without compromising what Rosa and I had built. And the ones you couldn't tell. James looked at her steadily. I was trying to get there, he said. We were 2 weeks away from having enough to move on it through federal channels. He gestured vaguely at the hospital around them. This accelerated the timeline significantly. Emily absorbed this. You were managing this for 8 months, she said. Alone. Not alone, he said. A few others. But not me. James looked at his daughter. You left the valley, he said simply. You built a different life. I was trying to protect that life from coming back into contact with something that could compromise it. And instead, Emily said, it came directly to my hospital and took me hostage. Yes, James said. And the word came out with the full weight of a man who had spent the last several sitting with that specific irony. That's what happened. The silence between them had a different quality now, not the comfortable silence of before, but the silence of two people sitting with a gap between what was intended and what occurred, which is one of the more uncomfortable things to sit with. I could have helped, Emily said. I know, James said. 8 months ago, 6 months ago, I could have been part of what you were building. I have knowledge, I have skills, I have access to... I know, James said again, and this time his voice was quiet in a way that stopped her. She looked at him. I made a choice to protect you, he said. It was the wrong call. I'm not going to argue that it wasn't the wrong call. But I made it because protecting you is the most natural thing I have ever done in my life, and it overrode my better judgment. He paused. It usually does. Emily sat with that. She thought about the way she had stood in the hallway of this hospital 3 hours ago and watched Damien Cross step off the elevator, and instead of retreating, she had stayed. She thought about the specific quality of the decision, not brave, not fearless, just practical and clear, and she thought about where that quality had come from and who had taught it to her without meaning to. We're going to have a longer conversation about this, she said. About what you've been managing and what you should have told me, James said. Not tonight, she said, but soon. Agreed, he said. Then a knock at the family lounge door. Rosa Mendez leaned in. Her expression was the expression of someone managing several things simultaneously, which was her default state, but underneath it, there was something else, the particular energy of new information that changes the shape of an existing picture. Sorry to interrupt, Rosa said, which was a formality, because Rosa Mendez had never in her professional life actually been sorry to interrupt when the interruption was necessary. We've had a development. Cross? James said. Cross gave us enough to open the encrypted archive that Ethan Cole transferred before the mercenaries arrived, Rosa said. We started pulling the contents about 40 minutes ago. She paused. It's bigger than we thought. The network didn't just rebuild. It embedded. It has people inside 3 county law enforcement departments and at least 1 federal contractor. Emily looked at her father. James looked at Rosa. The list Cross described, James said carefully. The names. We have it, Rosa said. We have the full list, not the partial version Cross described. 14 names. And we have the documentation connecting each name to a specific role in the rebuilt network. She paused again, and this pause had a different weight to it. 2 of the names on the list are law enforcement officers. One of them is a detective with access to protected witness information. The room went very still. That's how they found Cole, Emily said. That's how they found Cole, Rosa confirmed. Someone inside the system told them where he was and what room he was in. We've already made the arrest, but, she looked at James. It also means the network knew about the monitoring operation you and I have been running. James Carter went very still. How much did they know, he said. We're still assessing, Rosa said. But enough, they knew enough. She looked at both of them. The good news is that with what Cole had and what Cross added, we have more than enough to dismantle the whole thing. Today actually accelerated the timeline in a way that works in our favor, as backwards as that sounds. Emily thought about what Damien had said in room 417, that he had come to this hospital, thinking there was still a window, still a possibility. There had been no window. Ethan Cole had been thorough. And now the information was in the right hands. 14 names, Emily said. Are the people I know on it safe? Rosa looked at her. We're moving on all 14 simultaneously as of about 6 minutes ago. Nobody on that list is going to have time to act on anything before we have them. Emily let out a breath. Okay, she said. Rosa nodded. I'll need you in about an hour, Emily. We can do it here in the hospital if you'd prefer not to go to the precinct tonight. Here is fine, Emily said. Rosa left. James and Emily sat in the suddenly altered quiet of the family lounge. And what had changed was not the air or the light or the furniture, but the full shape of the day which had expanded. In the space of Rosa's 3-minute briefing, from a single terrible afternoon into something that had been building for 8 months and that had now, finally and irrevocably, broken open into daylight. 2 weeks, Emily said. James looked at her. You said you were 2 weeks away from being able to move on it, she said. And instead it came here. Yes, he said. And the reason it came here, she said slowly, is that whoever tipped off Damien Cross about Cole's location also knew enough about the monitoring operation to understand that waiting 2 more weeks meant losing the window entirely. James was very still. They forced the timeline, Emily said. They sent Cross into this hospital not just to get to Cole, but to collapse the investigation before it could be completed. James looked at his daughter for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. That's what happened. So this hospital me being here was not random, Emily said. No, James said. They knew I worked here, she said. I believe so, James said. Emily sat with that. The sound of the hospital moved around them, distant intercom. Ease. Footsteps. Ease. The particular steady hum of a building that existed to help people and had spent the afternoon being used for the opposite and was now returning, is patient and institutional, to its original purpose. Yes, they used me, Emily said, not with anger. With the careful, precise tone of someone marking a fact accurately. They were willing to use you, James said. There's a distinction. Not much of one from where I'm sitting, she said. No, he admitted, not much. She thought about Damien Cross in that chair, with his hands loose, explaining what he'd seen on a list and deciding for the first time in a long time to do something about it. She thought about the moment in the hallway when she'd said that people needed her more than they needed to see her panic. She thought about Gerald in 408 and Ethan in 417 and Priya, moving patients toward the east stairwell while everyone else was frozen. She thought about the specific quality of being used versus being capable. They thought I was leverage, she says, James said. They were wrong about what I am, she said. James looked at his daughter with the full, unguarded expression of a man who has spent decades keeping his feelings compressed to manageable dimensions and who is currently failing at that in the most specific and private kind of way. Yes, he said, they were. Emily looked at her hands. The tremor was gone. She noticed it was gone, the way you notice the absence of something that has been present for a long time. Not in the moment of its disappearance, but a few moments after, when the change registered in contrast to what was before. She stood up. I need to go check the rest of my floor, she said. Of course you do, James said. And then I'll talk to Rosa, she said. I'll be here, James said. Dad, she said, and stopped. He waited. When this is all done, she said, when Rosa has what she needs and Cross is processed and the 14 names are taken care of, I want to have dinner, somewhere that's not the clubhouse and not a hospital. Just dinner, the two of us. James looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. Emily walked out of the family lounge and back into the hallway of the 4th floor of Lakewood Memorial Medical Center. And she moved the way she always moved when she was working purposeful. Unhurried. Attentive. And she began the process of putting her floor back together. Room by room. Patient by patient. The slow, careful work of restoration after disruption. Which was when she thought about it, exactly what she had always done. What she didn't know yet was that 6 miles away, in a federal holding facility, Damien Cross was sitting across a table from 2 federal agents and a prosecutor, and he was talking, and he had been talking for the last 40 minutes, and what he was saying was going to take weeks to fully process and would eventually lead to indictments in 4 states and the dismantling of a network that had operated for 15 years under 12 different names. And she didn't know that Marcus Young, uncertain Marcus had given a voluntary statement that included the detail that a nurse on the 4th floor had never once stopped doing her job, not for a single minute of the entire operation. And that, in his opinion, that was the thing that had changed the temperature of the room, enough that choosing cooperation had started to feel like the obvious decision. And she didn't know that Priya had already sent a group text to every nurse on their shift that said, M is okay. Also, M is absolutely insane, and I mean that with complete love. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that Gerald in 408 needed his evening medication adjusted, and that 2 other patients on the far end of the hall needed vital checks that were now overdue, and that somewhere on this floor there was a family who had been waiting in a room for 3 hours for news about a surgery that had been completed this morning and who deserved to stop waiting. She found them at the end of the east corridor. A woman maybe 60, and a man the same age, and a younger woman who might have been their daughter, all 3 of them in various stages of the particular physical exhaustion that comes from sustained anxiety, and they looked up when Emily came through the door, and she saw on their faces the things she saw on families' faces sometimes, that she would never fully stop feeling that specific hope that turns your way and asks a question it's afraid to voice. Mrs. Delgado, Emily said. The older woman stood up. Is my husband. Your husband's surgery was successful, Emily said. He's been in recovery for several hours. We've had some difficulties in the building today that delayed our ability to reach you, and I'm so sorry for that. But he's stable, he's comfortable, and you can see him in about 15 minutes. The woman put both hands over her mouth. The man beside her took her arm. The younger woman made a sound that was pure relief, wordless and involuntary. Emily gave them a moment. She always gave families a moment when the news was good, because good news needed space, too. And sometimes in the urgency of moving through a shift, it was easy to deliver the good and be gone before the people receiving it had finished feeling it. Then she said, "I'll come get you when he's ready." She walked back into the hallway. The hospital hummed around her, steady, constant, returning to itself. Emily Carter went back to work. Rosa Mendez kept Emily at the hospital until nearly 10 o'clock that night. And the interview lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. And Emily answered every question with the same precision she brought to everything: direct, detailed, chronologically exact, nothing omitted, nothing embellished. Rosa had a recorder running and a second detective taking notes and a federal agent sitting in the corner who asked 3 questions in 2 hours and wrote down every answer in a leather notebook with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the testimony being given in this room was going to matter in a courtroom eventually. When it was done, Rosa walked Emily to the elevator herself. "You're going to be called as a witness," Rosa said, "probably multiple times. The federal case, possibly the state case, depending on how the charges split." "I know," Emily said. "It's going to be public," Rosa said. "Your name, your connection to your father. The full picture." Emily looked at the elevator doors. "I know that too. Are you okay with that?" Emily thought about it for a genuine moment, not a reflexive one. She thought about years of using her mother's maiden name, years of keeping 2 lives in separate containers, years of being Emily the nurse in one room and James Carter's daughter in another, never letting the rooms touch. "I'm okay with it," she said, and she meant it in a way she wouldn't have meant it yesterday. Rosa nodded. "Get some sleep." "I'll try," Emily said, which was what she always said. Someone told her to get some sleep, and she knew it wasn't going to happen easily. She rode the elevator down alone. James was waiting in the lobby. He had sent Ray home an hour ago, which meant he'd been sitting alone in a hospital lobby for 60 minutes. And when Emily came out, he stood up and fell into step beside her without asking where they were going, which was the thing she had always appreciated about her father. He had never been the kind of man who needed to know the destination before he started moving. They walked out together into the night air. The police vehicles were gone. The motorcycles were gone. The street in front of Lakewood Memorial looked exactly the way it always looked at 10 o'clock on a weeknight, quiet. Ordinary, lit by street lamps, a few cars moving past without urgency. If you had arrived at this moment without the context of the afternoon, you would have seen nothing extraordinary. Just a large man and a younger woman standing outside a hospital, and the younger woman tilting her head back to breathe the night air, and the large man standing close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. "You're exhausted," James said. "I am," she agreed. "Come home tonight," he said. "Not the valley, I mean your place." "I'll drive you, Dad. I live 12 minutes from here." "I know how far you live," he said. "I'm offering to drive you anyway." She looked at him. In the streetlight, he looked older than she usually let herself see him, not weak. James Carter was constitutionally incapable of looking weak, but human, with all the weight that word carried. He looked like a man who had spent a day being afraid for someone he loved and who was not entirely finished with the fear, yet even though the danger was over. "Okay," she said. "You can drive me." They didn't talk much on the way. James drove the way he did everything, steady, attentive, unhurried, and Emily sat in the passenger seat with her head tilted back and her eyes half open, and she watched the streetlights pass overhead and let the motion of the vehicle do the thing motion does when you're exhausted, which is to hold you in a kind of moving stillness that is almost like rest without quite being it. When he pulled up in front of her building, he put the car in park but didn't get out. "I'm going to make some calls tomorrow," he said, "about the men whose names were on that list. The ones I hadn't been able to warn yet. Rosa's team will have reached them by morning," Emily said. "I know," he said. "I'm calling anyway. Because some things need to come from family, not from law enforcement. Even when law enforcement has already handled the operational part." Emily looked at him. "Yeah," she said, "that's right. I learned that from watching you tonight," he said. "The way you went to check on Gerald. The way you found that family waiting for news about their husband. You didn't do any of that because it was your job description. You did it because someone needed to, and you were the person there to do it." Emily was quiet for a moment. "You do that too, Dad," she said. "You've always done that. Not always in ways that were visible, he said. Visible isn't the same as real, she said. He looked at her. No, he said, it isn't. She got out of the car, and he waited until she was inside the building, and she knew he was waiting because when she looked back from the lobby, he was still there. And she raised one hand through the glass. And he raised one back, and then she turned and went upstairs. She did not sleep well. She had not expected to. She lay in the dark, and her mind ran the afternoon back through itself in fragments, not chronologically. Not in any order that made narrative sense. Just pieces surfacing and submerging the way the mind processes large events. Finding edges and testing them. Sorting for meaning. Damien's face when she said her last name. Ray's voice through the ceiling tile. Gerald asking if it had been bad. Her father's face in room 417 when he first saw her. The family in the east corridor with their hands over their mouths. She fell asleep sometime around 2 in the morning and slept hard until 6:45, which was 11 minutes before her alarm was set to go off, and she lay in the narrow space of those 11 minutes and made a decision. She called the hospital and told them she was taking 2 personal days. Then she called her father. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had either been awake already or had been sleeping lightly enough that he was effectively awake, and both were plausible. I'm taking 2 days, she said. I want to come to the valley. A pause. I'll put coffee on, he said. She drove up herself, in her own car, on roads she had driven so many times in her childhood that her hands knew the turns before her eyes saw them. And when she pulled into the lot behind the chapter's auto shop, the familiar smell of engine grease and morning air, and the particular quality of light in the foothills at 8 in the morning hit her with a force that was physical, like something that had been held at a distance for a long time and was now released. Ray was in the shop. He looked up from an engine bay and nodded at her, which was Ray's version of an emotional greeting, and she nodded back, which was her version of accepting it. James was in the back office with 2 mugs of coffee on the table, and the morning light coming through the window that faced east. And he looked better than last night, still carrying things. He was always carrying things, but the particular acute strain of yesterday had eased enough that he looked more like himself. She sat down, she picked up the coffee, she said, "Tell me everything." From the beginning, 8 months ago. All of it. James looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he told her. He talked for an hour and 20 minutes, and Emily listened without interrupting, except for 3 questions at specific points where she needed clarity. And what she heard over that hour and 20 minutes was a story she had been living adjacent to without knowing it, the slow, careful construction of a case against a network that had spent 12 years not merely surviving but adapting, embedding, growing more sophisticated with each iteration, while the people who had originally brought it down had gradually moved on and stopped watching. James and Rosa had started watching again 8 months ago because of a name, a financial transaction, a connection that surfaced during an unrelated investigation, and that most people would have missed, and that James Carter had not missed because he had spent 12 years carrying the memory of what the network was capable of, and paying attention to anything that rhymed with it. "You should have told me," Emily said when he was done. "Yes," he said, "not to protect me, because I could have helped, because I have resources and access and a position in this community that would have been useful." "I know," he said. "And because I'm an adult," she said, "and I have been for a long time, and keeping me outside the circle to protect me treats me like something more fragile than I am." James looked at the coffee mug. "Old habits," he said. "Old habits almost got me killed yesterday," she said. And her voice was even when she said it, not accusatory, just precise. Because precision served better than anger when the goal was to change something rather than simply express feeling about it. James absorbed that. "You're right," he said. "Completely right. And I'm sorry. I know you are," she said. "So here's what we're going to do differently going forward." James looked up. "I'm not asking to be in the middle of everything," Emily said. "I don't want to be in the middle of everything, but I want to know. When there's something connects the people I love. When there's something that could walk through the door of my life without warning, I want to know. That's not a negotiation. That's a requirement." James Carter looked at his daughter with an expression that she recognized as the one he used when he had been corrected by someone he respected and was acknowledging it fully. He said, "Good," she said. She picked up her coffee and drank it, ease, and he picked up his ease. And they sat in the morning quiet of the back office of the auto shop, ease. And it was ordinary and specific and real in the way that only ordinary moments are after extraordinary ones. Then Ray knocked twice on the doorframe and leaned in. "These roses on the phone," he said. "For you." He was looking at Emily. Emily took the call. Three things Rosa said without preamble, because Rosa Mendez did not do preamble. One, the 14 arrests were all successful. No incidents, no resistance, all in custody as of 6 this morning. Emily exhaled. Two, the federal prosecutor has reviewed the cold documentation and the cross-testimony and has formally opened a case. This is going federal, all the way. It's going to be a significant trial. Okay, Emily said. Three, Rosa said. And her voice changed slightly on the third item. Took on a quality that Emily had not heard from Rosa before, which was a kind of careful deliberateness that suggested she was about to say something she had thought about how to say. Damian Cross made a request through his attorney. He asked that it be passed to you. Emily waited. He asked that if there is a mechanism legally, through the victim impact process, through whatever channel exists for him to communicate a formal apology to the patients and staff of Lakewood Memorial, he would like to pursue it. And separately, personally, not through any legal channel, he wanted you to know that he is aware that the reason anyone walked out of that building yesterday is because of the choices you made inside it. He didn't phrase it as gratitude exactly. His attorney said he phrased it as an acknowledgement of debt. Emily was quiet for a moment. "Tell his attorney," she said carefully, "that I'll think about the formal mechanism. And tell Rosa, tell yourself that what happened in that building was the result of a lot of people making better choices than they might have made. He's including him at the end." "I'll pass that on," Rosa said. "And Rosa," Emily said. "Yeah, the young one, Marcus. His cooperation agreement is being finalized," Rosa said. "He's going to come out the other side of this. He's 23, no priors, and his statement was the most detailed and voluntary of anyone taken into custody yesterday. The prosecutor is inclined to be reasonable." Emily thought about Marcus in the doorway, asking Damian why he had signed up for all of it. "Good," she said. She handed the phone back to Ray and went back into the office and sat down and told her father the three things Rosa had told her, and James listened to all three and was quiet for a moment after the third. "He acknowledged the debt," James said. "That's what she said." "These men like Cross don't do that easily," he said. "I know," Emily said. "Which is why I'm taking it at face value." James nodded slowly. They sat for a while longer, and then Ray made eggs, which was something he did when he wanted to do something useful and didn't know what else to do. And the three of them ate at the long table in the shop's break room and didn't talk much and didn't need to. In the days that followed, Lakewood Memorial Medical Center went through a process that institutions go through after significant events: formal reviews, staff debriefings, meetings with department heads, a security assessment, a counselor brought in for employees who wanted to talk about what they'd experienced. Emily attended everything she was asked to attend and participated fully and said what she needed to say, and she also quietly checked on every member of her floor staff personally, one by one, not in any official capacity, but just as a colleague who wanted to know how they were doing. Priya, predictably, was doing fine. Priya had the specific resilience of someone who processed fear by converting it immediately into narrative, and she had already told the story of the afternoon to approximately 40 people and had made it funnier and more dramatic each time without losing the essential truth of it, which Emily found she didn't mind at all. The young nurse named Torres, who had been trapped in the supply room for 2 hours, was not doing as well. And Emily sat with him for 40 minutes in the break room 2 days after the incident. And she didn't offer him solutions or clinical frameworks or structured talking points. She just sat with him and listened to him describe what it had been like. And when he was done, she said, "That was a very hard thing to be in the middle of. The fact that it affected you is correct. The fact that it happened to you is not your fault. Those are different statements, and they're both true." Torres looked at her. "Were you scared?" he asked. Honestly, Emily said. Yes, but I had things to do, and doing them gave the fear somewhere to go besides just sitting in my chest. How do you learn to do that? He asked. Emily thought about her father. About years of sitting at the top of the stairs listening to men talk. About engine grease and foothills. And a man who looked at every room and counted exits and taught her to do the same without ever formally teaching her anything. You grow up around people who model it, she said. And then one day you realize you've been doing it yourself for years without noticing. Torres nodded slowly. You can talk to the counselor, Emily added. That's not weakness. That's using the resource that's available, which is what you'd tell a patient. Torres smiled, despite himself. Yeah, he said. Okay, ease. Gerald Marsh was discharged 4 days after the incident, and his grandson, Marcus, the real Marcus, not the mercenary Marcus, which Emily had decided was a coincidence the universe owed her, given everything else the week had handed her, came to pick him up. And he was indeed a young man who brought chocolate chip cookies. And he looked at Emily with the particular expression of someone who has heard a great deal about a person and is now meeting them for the first time. He talked about you the whole time, Marcus said, tilting his head toward his grandfather. He talked about you the whole time too, Emily said. Specifically about a Little League championship in 1987. Marcus put his face in his hands. Not again, he said. Gerald looked between them with great satisfaction. It was a very good championship, he said. Emily helped Gerald into the wheelchair for the ride to the exit, which was hospital policy regardless of how functional the patient was. And Gerald submitted to this with the theatrical reluctance he brought to everything he considered indignity while secretly enjoying. And when they reached the exit, he took her hand. Thank you, he said. And he meant it in a way that carried the full weight of the specific afternoon they had both survived. Even though his version of surviving it had been in a hospital bed, and hers had been rather more active. Thank you for staying in that bed, she said. You did exactly what I asked. You were very convincing, he said. She watched them go the old teacher and entrance with the cookies, and she stood at the hospital entrance for a moment in the afternoon sun, and she thought about what Ray had said, that she had been connecting everything, that she was the one making it hold together. She didn't think of it that way, exactly. She thought of it as doing what was in front of her, one thing at a time, each thing as well as she could manage it, which was how her father had always described his own work. In the rare moments he described it at all. Maybe that was the inheritance, not the reputation, not the chapter, not the leather and the bikes and the legend that had accumulated around the Carter name over decades. The specific habit of doing what was in front of you as well as you could do it, and trusting that the accumulation of those choices meant something. Ethan Cole called her 3 weeks later. He was at a facility she didn't have the address for. And he sounded better, the voice was stronger. Less gray at the edges. And he had apparently been giving Rose's contacts an enormous amount of additional information from the encrypted archive that was, by his description, like pulling a thread and finding it connected to everything. I wanted to thank you, he said, directly. Not through lawyers or intermediaries. Just you. You don't need to thank me, Emily said. You were my patient. You kept me alive and bought enough time for everything. Cross-handed over to be useful, Ethan said. That's more than keeping a patient stable. It's the same category, Emily said. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Your father said you'd say something like that? You talked to my father, Emily said. He called last week, Ethan said. We talked for about an hour. He wanted to understand the full picture of what the archive contained. In detail, specifically the parts that related to the men who had helped his chapter in the original investigation 12 years ago. Emily felt something move through her. He never mentioned that, she said. He said he probably wouldn't, Ethan said. He said you had enough to carry and he was handling his own part. Emily sat with that. Is everyone safe, she said. The men whose names were on the list. All 14 arrests held, Ethan said. Nobody's walking away from what we handed the federal prosecutor. It's done, Emily. The network that's been operating since before you and I ever met, it's done. This time, all the way down. She pressed her hand flat against her desk and breathed. Okay, he agreed. Take care of yourself, she said. Do your physical therapy. Don't try to rush the shoulder. Ethan made a sound that was definitely a laugh. You're still treating me, he said. These old habits, she said. She hung up and sat in her apartment in the evening quiet and felt the specific weight of something concluding, Not the artificial conclusion of a story reaching its designated end, but the actual conclusion of a real thing, the way real things end, which is not with a single dramatic moment, but with the slow accumulation of smaller finalities that add up to a whole. 14 arrests. 1 archive. 1 trial being built. 1 network dismantled. 1 list of names that was now just a list, not a done. The dinner she had promised her father happened on a Thursday 6 weeks after the incident at Lakewood Memorial. Not the clubhouse, not the hospital. A restaurant in a town 20 minutes from both, a place that made the kind of food that required no decisions more complicated than what you felt like eating, and that had booths wide enough that James Carter could sit in one without looking like he was performing a magic trick. They ordered without discussing what to order, which was the ease of 2 people who know each other's preferences, and they ate without rushing, and they talked. They talked about everything. They talked about the case and what Rosa expected from the trial and what Ethan had said on the phone. They talked about the men whose names had been on the list, 3 of whom Emily had known since she was a child and all of whom were safe. They talked about Marcus, the young mercenary, who had apparently enrolled in a community college course and who Rosa mentioned in passing with something that sounded like cautious hope. They talked about Emily's floor and Torres and Priya and Gerald's Little League story. They talked about James's chapter and the legitimate work it had built over 20 years and the auto shop and Ray, who had apparently decided that climbing through hospital ceiling panels was a perfectly reasonable activity for a man in his 50s and had no intention of reconsidering this assessment. And then over coffee, because conversations that matter tend to arrive with coffee, James said something he had clearly been carrying for a while and had decided tonight was the night. I've been thinking, he said, about what it would look like if you were more connected to what we do. Not the chapter specifically, but the work we do alongside Rosa, the investigation, the situations where we see something that law enforcement needs to know about, and someone needs to be the bridge. Emily looked at him. You're asking if I want to be part of it, she said. I'm asking if you want to know that the door is open, he said carefully. You don't have to walk through it. You don't have to change anything about your life. But I'm done keeping you outside the room when the room matters. Emily wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She thought about the choice she had made when she was 22 to leave the valley and build something separate. She had needed that. She still believed she had needed it not to run from her father, but to find the part of herself that existed outside of his shadow, in her own light, doing work that was entirely hers. She had found those parts. She knew who she was, and knowing who she were was different from choosing to be only that, from closing every other door and deciding that the self she had built was the final version. I'm not changing careers, she said. I know, he said. I'm not becoming an investigator or anything adjacent to that. I know, he said again. But she said, and the words sat between them for a moment. James waited. I don't want to be kept outside the room, she said. When it matters, when it's real. You tell me, and I decide what I do with it. That's what I want. That's what you'll have, James said. Emily nodded. She drank her coffee. Outside, the evening was moving in the way evenings move in that part of the country slowly, with a particular quality of light that happens when the sun has gone down but the sky hasn't decided to be dark yet. Everything suspended for a few minutes in something that is neither day nor night, but its own thing, briefly, before the dark comes in. She thought about something Damien Cross had said in room 417, sitting in that chair-sopter with his hands loose in front of him, saying that one moment was usually where it started. She had pushed back on that. She had said one moment wasn't enough. She still believed that. One moment isn't enough to change a life. One moment is just a doorway. What matters is whether you walk through it. She had walked through something in that hospital. Not a door, she had chosen one that was forced open around her by men who thought she was leveraged by a situation that had not asked her permission. But she had walked through it the way she walked through everything. Doing what was in front of her, one thing at a time. And what was on the other side of it was not a different life. It was the same life with its full shape finally visible. Both rooms. Both worlds. The nurse and the daughter. The hospital and the valley. The person she had built and the person she had come from. She had never actually been two people. She had always been one. She had just been deciding slowly, across the entire length of her adult life, what that one person looked like from every angle. Now she knew. James Carter drove home from that dinner thinking about his daughter and what she had said and what she hadn't said, and he thought about how she had held that floor together under conditions that had broken trained professionals. And he thought about what she had said to Ethan Cole when Ethan tried to thank her that it was the same category. He's keeping patients stable and holding a situation together. They were the same thing to her. It was all just what was in front of her, done as well as she could do it. He thought about where she had learned that. He thought about the long dinner table in the old house and all the years of his daughter at the top of the stairs and what she must have absorbed up there in the dark, listening to men who were trying, imperfectly and sometimes badly, to do the things that needed doing. He thought about his wife, Emily's mother, who had been the most steady person he had ever known and who Emily resembled in the ways that mattered most. In the quality of her attention and the precision of her honesty, and the way she could be afraid and useful at the same time. He thought, I raised her. And then more honestly, she raised herself. I just made sure she had something to push against. Damian Cross entered a federal plea agreement 14 weeks after the incident at Lakewood Memorial and received a sentence that reflected the scope of his cooperation, which was comprehensive, and which by every account from the federal prosecutor's office had accelerated the timeline of the case by months. He would serve time. He would serve significantly less than he might have served. Whether that was justice was a question that different people answered differently. And Emily, when Rosa asked her for her honest opinion about it, said what she had said in the hospital about Briggs, that a man calculating his own survival was a man making predictable choices. And predictable wasn't the same as wrong. Rosa had written that down. Emily had not asked why. 6 months after the incident, Lakewood Memorial Medical Center installed a plaque in the 4th floor corridor near the nurses' station. It was modest hospitals tended toward modesty in their commemorations, and it acknowledged the staff members who had acted with exceptional dedication to patient care under extraordinary circumstances on that Tuesday afternoon. Emily's name was on it. She walked past it every shift without stopping. Not because it didn't mean anything to her, because what it represented was not behind her in the past, but in front of her in the work, in every patient on every floor, in every family waiting for news, in every person who came through those doors afraid and needed someone to be steady enough to take the fear from them for a little while. That was the job. That had always been the job. She had done it the first day she walked onto this floor as a new nurse, with a borrowed stethoscope and her mother's maiden name on her badge. And she had done it on the worst Tuesday in this hospital's recent history. And she was doing it right now, this shift, this hour, this patient in front of her who needed her attention and was going to get it. A woman does not need to carry a weapon to be the most formidable person in a room. She does not need a famous name or a legend or a line of motorcycles at her back. She needs to know who she is, all the way down, in the parts that don't shift when pressure is applied, and she needs to be willing to be that person completely, without apology, in every room she walks into. Emily Carter knew who she was. She had always known. She just hadn't stopped long enough, in all the years of building and leaving and becoming, to let that knowledge settle into its full weight. It had settled now, and she carried it the way she carried everything that mattered, not as a burden, and not as a trophy, but as the simple, irreducible fact of herself, walking forward, doing the work, one patient at a time, one choice at a time, for as long as she had the strength to do it, which, if her father was any indication, was going to be a very long time.